All right, welcome to lesson 51, Radio 223 part-timers. And we are going to continue with news, sports, traffic, and weather. As you can see, this is part 6 of 12. Within the next level, you can check out chapter 5, 532, reading the bulletin, page 192 to 194, and then collateral in Beyond Powerful Radio, the New York Focal Press, chapter 24, news anchoring, page 275 to 282. So it's quite a short lesson, but we will obviously speak in length as we normally do with all the subject matter and all the points, and we'll continue our conversation with news as we have been doing for the past couple of lessons. All right, so just before we start with the lesson, this is a to-do list. So this is what you got to do for yourself. What you will do is you'll have, let's say, you can go and look at any news broadcast. So it can be either on TV, and you can go find a lot of the broadcasts, like on YouTube. Go check out ENCA, or you can go check out EWN, but particularly ENCA because there are actual bulletins that have been posted up there. Bulletins are split up into the stories, and you can go check out something small, like a 2 or 3 minute video, and what you can do is then conduct a analysis of the newscast, radio, or TV, right? So the analysis can focus on the words that they used to write the bulletin itself, and obviously keeping in mind like what you have learned in terms of the inverted pyramid, inverts in terms of like facts, in terms of stats and how to use that, in terms of delivery methods that's mentioned there, the way that vocals are changed, particularly when it is a puff piece or it is more of a lifestyle story or it's sports, to compare, or in comparison, should I say, with, let's say, a news broadcast that is about, let's say, politics, or it's about war, whatever it may be, or any other number of news characteristics mentioned in the actual text of itself, right? So, as I've mentioned before, their facts, example, the way that they use stats and numbers, the way that they maybe conduct I say, an improv interview, so something that might be subsequent to this news story. So, what they do normally, as you've seen a news broadcasts on television, is that they'll have the news story and say, in studio with me today is, and they'll say, for example, whoever it is, Minister of Power. And we're going to have a quick conversation about the setback of the ANC's administration bumbleness, to quote the news press. Okay. All right. So you can do that for yourself, and then you can always check in with me. All right. So reading a bulletin on air, and it's something that we have covered before in terms of delivery. In one of the earlier lessons, where I did put the full broadcast, and the one that was written down for both the sports and the news itself, went through a couple of delivery methods. The one about keeping your tone very monotone when you are delivering the news itself. Definitely have to practice. You know that I made some mistakes as well. But to show you that, when we come across, let's say, names that are quite difficult, then we've got to go to YouTube to go and see the actual pronunciation of that. So when you do have a name of a city or a person, or even, let's say, technical jargon that you haven't really seen before, or even when you go doubt yourself just a little bit about the pronunciation of something that is quite a niche word, like, for example, niche and not niche, right? The way that it's spelled cliche or not klitsch, things like that, where again, I remember we had a junior newscaster on 702, and she would do the evening shift when I would do my show, and she would constantly come to me just to double check and say, is this the right pronunciation? It's not that I'm the god of pronunciation or not. The point is that the behavior and the kind of the work ethic that she had makes sure that she doesn't go on air. She would go check by a number of people, but once again, also to double check that on the net to see, listen, am I doing this correctly? Am I saying this correctly? Is this wording correctly? Grammatically, is it correct as well in terms of the delivery and the way that we write it down? Have I only, let's say, written one fact per sentence? Does that sound too long? Does it sound too short? Does the news bulletin sound like it's missing certain facts that make us understand the context of it better. All of those checks are really important for you to be a professional news bulletin reader or journalist, writer, etc. Right? Okay, so the background, not the foreground. Remember that reading the news must grab attention. So, one, it is in the way that we write the news, sure, but also the way that you have this confidence. Because remember, the confidence comes from the ownership, right? You have gone to compile this news. It might have gone through a process that you do understand in terms of it could be from a field reporter or, let's say, field journalists that are, let's say, funneling the news through towards you. So they bring it, they're compiling it and they're supplying you with it. It could be like from a news department, like example, the SABC, that is once again providing it to you as an anchor, but you will still have some kind of ownership of it because you you know that the listeners do not know what you're going to say next, right? It's not like they are like scouring all the social mediums or online platforms to be able to know news before you know it. And again, the whole point is to make putting the new into the word news, right? So grab the attention, make sure that obviously you're using provocative language, not sensationalistic language. A good newsreader demands that listeners pay attention and cuts through the clutter of everyday life. So when we are putting the bulletin together, once again, the details are the very detailed details. So the sub-level details are really important for print example, right? For print media and print news, where you have the liberty of writing maybe a 4-minute article, that is also something that puts people off nowadays as a sidebar. But we do have a lot more time and space, should I say, that we are allocated, quote unquote, right? To assume that someone that wants to read a news article online or in a newspaper is doing so with the understanding that they want to spend some time in, let's say, consuming and processing that information, right? On the radio platform, we don't do that. We've explained before as to why we have passive audiences, short attention spans, and we want to make sure that we only have that 5, 6 sentence bulletin that includes only the essential facts that do make sense and that are sensical for something that we want to convey into their lives. Do not let a quest for brevity leave your story incomplete, right? So we can tell when something's missing in a news story. You're jumping from one fact to another, and there's no bridge information in between. When it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. That's genuinely the best advice that I can give you. And it is as simple as that, because if you write a news bulletin that doesn't make sense, you'll just feel it and you'll be like, something is not being said here. I don't quite understand where the inflation rate is coming from because I haven't quite uh, been given the information from our Minister of Finance as to why this particular, I don't know, new revelation in this long growing or long running or ongoing story comes from. But do not let a quest for brevity again leave your story incomplete. To err is human. So, in other words, to make some errors, sure, is very human. You can misread the script lines, but those mistakes are going to be they're going to be costly. So if you make the mistakes in terms of you let's say fumble over a word, that's okay. It's very normal. It's also something that you've got to make sure that you do as I say at its very least. So maybe 1 or 2 mistakes in a bulletin itself, because you have practiced before and you know exactly what you are saying because you did write the bulletin itself, or again, if it is provided to you by a news department, you would have to go and practice that execution, right? But mistakes that have to do again with facts and numbers and turning that into fiction is a real problem, right? So while you also are developing your execution style, that's going to be a kind of a trial and test period for you as well. And the thing is, record yourself while you are doing each bulletin, go listen back. After every execution, you do have time to go listen to a 3, 4, 5 minute bulletin and make sure that, okay, well, look, I didn't really like the way I kind of lowered my delivery there. I am not treating full stops as full stops instead of treating them as commas, where we lift our voice up, instead of full stops, where we keep that delivery stagnant. So, for example, if I read this 1 second point there where I see a full stop, I say mistakes are normal and will never entirely, will never, let me do that again. Well, mistakes are normal and will never be entirely avoidable. So you see that I will end the story or the line or the sentence on the same kind of tone and level that I started it with. Where if it was, let's say, a comma, and so I'm going to put, let's say, a comma in it just for completeness sake, or I would be like, excuse me, mistakes are normal and will never be entirely avoidable. It is also important that a newsreader develops their own style. So we normally go out in terms of execution with a full stop, sorry, with a comma. All right, let's go to some of the other points that are written here. Radio is a one-on-one medium, so the newsreader is telling a story in a manner that feels like it is happening face to face and one-on-one in the present time, right? The uh, present moment. So this is the true essence of a radio medium, to make sure that we retain our strongest skill set and our strongest, I say, vantage point, which is that personal, immediate connection with somebody without that kind of like pre-production feel and that cold. I don't know. Almost a print is very cold. Sure, TV is semi-cold, I guess, because we can actually see the person, so we do find a certain level of connection with them. But because again, it's that immediacy of the medium, and again, because we are talking one person to one person, um, that we will keep that essence of what keeps our medium the strongest at its highest and most obviously a highest and highest quality point. Right? So it is portable and personal. It should therefore be delivered as though it is being directly delivered to a friend rather than a collective, nameless and faceless mass, like what TV actually aims to do. So TV to a large extent, if you look at reporting on TV, it talks at you, and it is mostly part of the delivery, right? Not necessarily the wording that the news bulletins, the stories are compiled with. They're still compiled in the same manner that we do on radio. But again, because the consumer, so whether you are a listener or you are a viewer, right, you'll have a different mindset. And so the thing is, we know that we are in a space that is personal and that is interactive and it is one-on-one, the radio space I'm obviously referring to, right? That we do have this slight change in delivery, but it comes from your mindset, right? If you know that you're talking to one person, your entire delivery is changed, it is altered to a better obviously performance and a better delivery when you are, on radio. What, why, how, before who, when, and where most of the time, right? So if you're looking for a lead and to start, or so a lead to start your story, then look at what is happening. Why is this particular event or this current, I don't know, this immediate rise in news happening in a particular space? You understand that? And then how? How is it happening? Before we go into the who, when, and the where, there is obviously situations where the lead, where we've seen before, is written as a compilation of the what and the why, or the why and the how and the what, and then turns into the who and the when, or just the who, or maybe just the when or the where. But all these answers are for these questions are pretty much covered within every bulletin, right? If you can agree that we look at a bulletin, we'll definitely get an answer of what the bulletin is about. Why are we actually providing that listener with information? How did the story come about? Or, how is something uh, uh, being executed or whatever it may be, how it's laid out, who is involved, when it actually happened. Did it happen right now? Did it happen this morning? Did it happen last month? And now we're getting a bit of an update on it. And then the where, right, is normally something that obviously allows us. Is it in a prison? Is it in a school? Is it in government? Is it whatever it may be, right? Okay, so when reading the bulletin, be sensitive to how the story will affect the listener, why that is the case, and what the possible changes entail to the listener's life, right? So this gives the story a we are in it together feel that bridges the distance between the on-air presenter and the listener. Okay, read stories, as I said, about 8 to 10 times before reading them on air to make sure that you do have ownership. You never, don't ever go to the actual mic, to the studio, and decide that because you've written it out and you've read through it, and you haven't read through it out loud, that you now have some kind of confidence over how you're going to execute it. The way that we read, obviously, is a way that we process things differently in our mind to when we actually go and we say something out loud and we actually execute it with our mouths and our tongues and the way that we use our throats and our chest and the way that we breathe or whatever it is, right? So we don't want to wing it at all. We'll rather make sure that we have kind of definitely, not kind of, definitely practice it beforehand. And that is a very disastrous way of also, and it's a bad work ethic for you to go there and be like, okay, or I don't care as much for the product, the end product. I'm just going to be like, I'll give the listener exactly what I want, and they'll have to deal with it as well. The lack of read through or preparation will almost always result in misreading the bulletin, which sounds unprofessional and unprepared. And once again, it is taking your listeners, I mean, just their tolerance at, at a very big disadvantage, also taking it for granted as well. So sound paints a picture and creates energy. So good radio stories should also have sound there through maybe a sound bite, right? And sound bites that are obviously very contextually relevant and are relevant to telling the story. So if we do have, let's say, a hurricane or a tornado, we don't want to hear the tornado itself. That makes no sense because we'd rather see the tornado, but we definitely want to have like a soundbite of the affected people that maybe have had their housing obviously destroyed or their businesses or they've survived like a face off with the tornado, so an encounter with. You'd want to be able to add that as a soundbite to add dimension and color to the actual story itself. A pause refreshes, so utilize a fraction of a second to pause for emphasis, and the ever so slight elongation of words will stress its importance. So elongation, just the way that I did that, or emphasis, so importance, without making it sound comical, so which will draw the listener's attention, right? So kind of like that pause that I put in there and making sure that I kind of emphasize the attention part of that particular sentence, right? So if it were so easy, there would be tons. I don't think that's definitely not the correct writing. Let's just change that over there. Okay, tons of great news readers, but we don't have. We have a lot of people that might think that they can do the job, but once again, it goes back to the whole essence and the skill set of how do we present as a presenter that makes us different and unique from anyone else that is a better accountant or again just a medical practitioner or so on and so forth, right? So if you listen closely to a variety of newsreaders, you might think that most of them actually sound very dull and boring because of that monotone and with that kind of ease that they do the bulletin as well. You're like, well, this sounds really basic. It's just someone talking and they're reading a story, which makes things quote unquote easier, but it is definitely a craft on its own, a profession on its own. Otherwise, wouldn't pay someone so much money to do that, right? So this is usually because one, they fear to go beyond the acceptable to reach the exceptional, right? They lack practice, which is a sign of laziness, and they lack coaching on air checking, which is a sign of a station's laziness. So if you understand that, so this is a newsreader that is mediocre at best. So they, let's say, find a comfort space in just getting it right. Maybe not, because even if you get things right, if you do things right in life, you should attempt to make it better. You can always do things a little bit better, and not in the sense that, oh well, you never will be good enough. No, you are good enough, but you can always be better, right? And when we do crit and we do snoops and we do give advice or suggestions, quote unquote, to any media practitioner or any practitioner, right? We do always, even if they are doing things correctly, we say, okay, look, let's hone in on that. Let's use the value of what you're doing on air and let's find a way to make it like exceptional. Let's make it great. Okay. Then again, that laziness from both sides, the management and the honest staff, will definitely have an effect on the result of the end product. Okay. So if you're learning the trade of a newsreader, then there are some tips to help you move forward. The first one is to ensure that you follow ongoing air checks and implement the program manager's advice on how to constantly improve. So make sure that you do listen to your manager, but also make sure when you do have a snoop check, whether it be your news editor, or whether it be the program manager, whether it be both of them with the station manager, it doesn't matter, right? You've got to understand that you've got to come with questions as well. If you are struggling with something, or if you do tackle something new, or you want to try something new on air, make sure that you are part of that conversation. It also allows buy-in to your growth, right, from your side, and it doesn't allow dictation from only, right, the manager side. So it's one-sided. You're just being told, and you're going to go and do. You will kind of also remain stagnant in that. Remember that one can only be greater with interaction with others, or by and large with interaction of others. So your manager can be a greater manager should you want to also take part in that process, right? Of him or her being a greater manager for you. They're going to know your needs. They're going to know where your shortcomings are, or again, once again, your and let's say your goals and aspirations for being a better, let's say, on air broadcaster. Be your own critic. Again, like you're not a stranger to being able to understand the different elements of being able to do what you need to do. So once you do have, let's say, these crit sessions, you also know the benchmarks for taking that and doing that on a daily and within a daily, obviously, a number of times basis to be able to kind of crit yourself and make sure that I constantly crit and I can definitely improve on wherever I am. Send your work to people you know you can trust and ask them for for acceptable critique, right? So acceptable critique is constructive critique. You know that this person has been dealing with what you are doing from both a professional and maybe a personal perspective, right? You can also send it out to like I say, like someone on the street, a normal listener. So maybe your sister or your mother or your father, whatever it is, and see how they might just be processing that, their opinion on how you did it, just from a layman's point of view, right? And then go and seek the help, right? So let's look at some points that are in this looks like Beyond Powerful Radio. So the checklist that we want to make sure that you go, make sure that when you're writing a bulletin, the whole process of being, that executable product that is of high quality. What is the subject? What is the information? If it is new, is it new information, or has it been, say, it's been alive for quite some time, so we need a new angle on it? Who cares? How will this matter to your audience? So, which parts of that particular story, which elements and facts am I including in it to make sure that it is relevant to that particular target audience? Would you have a conversation with someone about the story off air? So again, it is one of those things where we say, okay, like I've heard about a tax increase on, let's say, all salaries. I'm definitely going to have something to say over the water cooler or over coffee with family or friends or my boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife, doesn't matter, right? I will bring this up because it's going to stress me. I did get the information from my news source, right? Be it radio, TV, whatever it is, but it's definitely something that I would want a longer conversation on. So it definitely checks that box. And I'm going to, as a newsreader or a news journalist, I want to include this aspect of what is happening in the world around me in my bulletin. So does it affect anything like safety, human emotions, money, or other concerns of the listener? and how does it affect it or of them or these aspects in their lives? Who are the characters or people involved in the story, and do you care about them? Whether it is you hate them or you love them, and you are indifferent about them because of what they are doing, and you've had enough about the shenanigans or whatever that they might be part of, whatever it is. Will the audience care in actual fact? So is it visual? So are you writing the story in ways that we do create theatre of the mind? Is the writing clearly understandable? So you have written well, you've written simply, written factually. Go global. How big can the story be? Can a huge national, international story be told with a local angle? So if so, how? Let's think of an example. Here it says Best Oil Company has been ordered to pay $100 million to clean up the largest toxic spill ever to hit the American Southwest. It's a long sentence there. But right here in Franklin, the Environmental Protection Agency reports some dangerous pesticides leaking into our own groundwater. The cost of cleaning that up will be high. So that's quite straightforward. Where you see we delve into something as a bit of a springboard with the international crisis of how to clear up, toxic infiltration into oceans and whatever it is, kind of the environment in whatever aspect, and then bringing it back home. Should there be relevance to what is happening here at home as well, right? Or a ripple effect. Let's go to the next point. So if there are several angles to the story, can multiple versions be made? So that does the story have a second angle or potential for a Monday morning? Can it be used on a slow news day? So in other words, so long running or ongoing news where we can go and pivot a new angle at a later date. Double check your work before it goes on air. So when you are pressured in a hurry, it's easy to leave out one or more important elements. Spelling, again, can affect the execution and the pronunciation of what it is that you want to say. And also grammar, once again, right? And also remember the semantics of punctuation, right? Commas, again, dashes, things like that you've got to leave out. Make sure that the story contains everything important. All right, let's look at a quiz. So multiple choice, choose the best of the answers is the first one. A good radio news lead typically chooses from these three factual leads, right? First, so you know which slide we're obviously talking about, is the who, why, or the where, the how, why, the when, the what, why, and the where, or the what, why, and the how. You obviously are now, you're busy circling back to earlier slides to go and see which one of those is correct. In order to fight through the clutter of the radio listening environment, a radio news anchor would choose this lead to begin the story. You'll pay more at the pump this morning. The Lundberg report states gasoline prices rose 3 cents per gallon yesterday. A recent gas consumer survey says oil companies continue to gouge the little guy. Or D, area gas prices jumped to $3 a gallon in just over a week. So if you know more so which one of these is correct, you tend to want to know exactly which one of these are preferable. They're quite almost similar, except this one is definitely incorrect, excuse me, right? So these ones are written a little bit more closely to what could be a correct answer. Which of those is correct? Okay. So three, a public speaking technique is useful for a radio news anchor, or that would be useful for a radio news anchor, would be using over exaggerated gestures. Does not make sense, right? The fraction of a second pause, consistent eye contact with the audience also does not make sense, right? And a clear, distinguishable voice. Is it B or is it D? Answer: true or false. 4. Newswire stories should never be rewritten since they come from a professional news service. So Reuters, BBC, the AP or the UP. I think you know the answer to that. And it is permissible for an anchor to use the second person pronoun you in a newscast. Hmm. Right. Let me not say anything because then they'll obviously give you the answer. Right. But I think that's quite straightforward. Also, when you do answer this, try and put yourself or put what you might think are both or situations like, for example, in the true or false, put that in a real life situation and say, let me use a case study and say, does this start to make any sense? Let me go and consult some of the theoretics and some of the information that has been provided to substantiate my understanding for the answers. So short answers describe how a local story describe how a local story choose any topic can achieve national attention in just a matter of hours. So that is the ripple effect and how, let's say, something that could be possibly a small little tabloid newspaper somewhere in Paris, whatever, becomes something that has a ripple effect on national news stations in the country. Use the guidelines described in this chapter and elsewhere in the text to explain this current phenomenon of how that ripple effect actually does happen. Okay, those are the key lecture points. I'm going to end the lecture there.